Good evening, councillors, staff, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Ordinary Council meeting of the Council for April 2020. My name is Councillor Margaret Thomas, and as Mayor, I will be chairing this meeting. I wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we are meeting on and share the message of the elders. Kaya Kaya Burdias, Marman and Yoks, Nuna de Mort, Nitchakulan Nalamaya, Kalamunda Buja, Yayi, Nandurapan, Wajulas Kulan, Jina, Nuna da Nitcha, Nunga Buja, Nunga Burdias Kura, Yayi, Burda, Borda, Kaya, Yunga. Hello, welcome to our leaders, men and women, who have come to our place today, this evening, and I am happy to see you all standing on Noongar land of their elders, past, present and future. Thank you. The operations of Council and the agenda for this meeting are governed by the provision of the Local Government Act, standing orders and rules of conduct. All matters of business listed in the agenda will be dealt with as separate decisions of Council. Thank you for your attendance and interest. Councillors, we are live streaming tonight. We're running a trial and we will review it tomorrow and fix up anything that needs fixing, and I take my hat off to the IT staff for doing it so quickly. Attendance, apologies and leave of absence.
Through the Chair, there are no apologies tonight and no leaves of absence. Approved previously.
Thank you. I don't believe we have any public questions. However, we have a questions on notice from Graham and Marie Ryan, of which you all have a copy, and those questions and answers will be recorded in the minutes of this meeting. Petitions and deputations. We have a deputation tonight from Mr. Peter Forrest, and I'll ask Mr. Forrest to come and give his deputation.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Is that better? Can I be heard?
Yes.
Presiding Member, Councillor Margaret Thomas and others present, my name is Peter Forrest, 36 Panoramic Terrace, Kalamunda. My topic is the Activity Centres, item 10.1.2. Firstly, I might say it's very confusing for ratepayers attempting to follow council decision making when we get two different agendas being published on this for this meeting. The first much shorter one that started on the cover saying this agenda replaces a public agenda briefing forum agenda for April. So the ratepayers residents, we can't really know whether council is fully aware of the detail of this proposal. The earlier content at item 10.1 done 1.1 activity centre is much shorter and has now become item 10.1.2, but rather oddly the city administration is asking council to simply note the content and adopt what is a highly complex, narrowly researched proposal to be advertised immediately seeking public comment. And that is at a time when large numbers of rate-paying community are preoccupied with immediate or foreseeable loss of employment and no prospect of resuming their former way of life. While it's acknowledged in the documentation that the multiple authors, that include two different external consultants, engaged no doubt at considerable extra cost, have read the old State Planning Policy 4.2 of 2010, they have missed, as previously in preparing the Activity Centre for Kalamunda, many vital issues that become much more apparent to the community than 10 years ago. For instance, safe movement of people, traffic volumes have increased very substantially, and essentially safety of crosswalks into and around activity centres are not mentioned at all in this 150-page document. By the way, that's what it looks like when it's printed out. In the first attempted example of activity centre planning by the city for for Kalamunda Township, Council should note the continuing traffic crossing chaos at the foot of Canning Road close to Stirk Path, between Stirk House and Stirk Medical, which has got a lot of traffic, pedestrian and vehicle, close to the junction with Haynes Street. That hasn't been addressed. Also, premature action by asset management to remove 5 parking bays to simply speed up traffic along Haynes Street by improving sight lines for drivers at pedestrian crossing points, not to provide safer crossing for pedestrians. Not recognising that is that Haynes Street is, or was, because we've lost another few thousand square metres of retail space, was lined either side with very short stay retail premises. For instance, dry cleaning, banks, hardware, newsagents, pharmacies, hairdressers, butchers, dress shops and confectioners. That is important to recognise. That's short stay, and therefore you'd expect that many parking bays would be available as possible. The latest activity centres project documentation is heavily engaged in numbers of people with description and modelling of changes in consumer behaviour concerning the retailing gravity model. Further reviewed by yet another external consultant, even using algebraic formulae to supposedly illustrate variability. Both, however, use out-of-date 2016 statistics to compare volumes and make projections. However, the document relates to various different localities and is supposed to be concerned with planning futures, but has mistakenly avoided the absolutely vital issue of commercial property ownership, investment realities, and very local socio-economic conditions in all these different areas. Smaller existing centres mentioned are most likely to have, for instance, owner-operators, both on and off retail premises, where the larger ones are more likely to have retail operators in leased premises, when the property owners being more or perhaps less motivated, perhaps some of them family is being left in family, perhaps not even recognising a need to enhance facilities to increase rental returns. Also, the wholesale buying power of larger retailers is much more likely to require larger and more modern premises and gain further benefit from proximity with a range of different product retailers and very easy access to covered parking. These convenience and proximity activity factors must also be related to current and future local road transit access networks, both for potential users and supply trucking. So it's not only important to recognise changing consumer preferences for online purchasing, which is amply explored, but many other variables that affect consumer choice. Interestingly, Forestfield Forum is one very successful recent example of private enterprise landowners who did not need an activity centre plan. They simply made a cooperative arrangement with all their lessees, including Coles, Woolworths, Dome and many others, for each to bring in their own architects to collaborate in a transformation to their mutual advantage by physically changing all internal store facades to be open-fronted, linking all units with covered external walkways, adding external landscaping, a safe play area and an external dining area as each one of them preferred. Then notifying the local authority before work commenced. Job done. That's what happened. This transformation has obviously increased consumer attractiveness and trade for all concerned. Yet why has all this external beautification stayed fully intact and not been vandalised? Simply because it has supplied an online 24-hour video link to the local police station. Now, Kalamunda Township, on the other hand, as you know, is declining, has lost its local police presence, and apart from retailers observing multiple local drug trafficking, Kalamunda Central has multiple overnight smash and grab raids with costly damage both externally and to shops internally. Apart from the current timing being highly inappropriate, to seek community input during a virus emergency with unprecedented unemployment among ratepayers, major changes in community behaviour are widely anticipated. This project could easily be deferred and further developed in terms of practicality before risking the potential wrath of ratepayers. Thank you, Madam.
Councillors, do you have any questions of Mr Forrest? Councillor Giardina.
Mr Forrest, you are aware that this is going out for public comment?
Yes.
You are aware that it is going out
Yes,
for public
of course,
comment?
of course.
Okay. Have you? I have seen a paper that you have forwarded to council, or an email.
Yeah.
Are you going to put something else forward also based
Well,
on
I
some
mean,
of this?
naturally I'm interested, as any interest ratepayer would be, and of course, you know, I'm involved with the ratepayers organisation, so of course, but it seemed to me that some use could be made of time by delaying this to a more appropriate time and put more effort into making it more workable.
I think, if I may, Madam Chair, I think the purpose of this going out is to garner more public opinion on it, and I think it's great that you have put in an email to us, but we require further information from other ratepayers, and I think tonight is the basis of that. So it'll help us, you know, get some more information from people what they might say. So I hope that it goes through.
Councillors, are there any more questions? Councillor Sewell.
Thank you, Peter. I was just wondering, we've been subject to a lot of criticism in terms of our planning around this, and you've articulated that fairly consistently. So I was wondering what you would deem to be a suitable alternative in terms of attracting and retaining businesses and creating employment within the city of Kalamunda.
Well, you've got to bear in mind that the current situation is very poor. There's 3,000 square metres, there was 3,000 square metres of empty retail space right down Central Avenue. Now IGA is closed. There's now around about 4,000 square metres, and that's not easily going to be made up. I think Kalamunda, provided that nothing is done to deal with the access, getting people in now. Bear in mind that this community here is much higher than average in age, and therefore they stagger across roads which are not with no pedestrian crossings. Even, it's mentioned in the report, something was provided, but I think they were looking back. I think these consultants must be working for some time in terms of accessing the Bibbulmun track. Well, try to get from the bus station to Bibbulmun track. You see what I mean? You've got to cross right up to the roundabout. Then there's no crossing to get over into that area of the Bibbulmun track. So, you know, while we talk enthusiastically about tourism, we've got to be real and say, what are people coming here for?
So,
You have a follow-up question.
thank you, Mayor. Yes, so based on what you're saying then, you deem this to be a pedestrian traffic issue, and you believe that if we deal with a pedestrian traffic issue, then that will resolve a lot of the issues that you've outlined this evening?
It would certainly help a great deal.
Are there any other questions? Thank you for coming to speak to us. We note your comments, Mr Forrest. Are there any applications for leave of absence?
Through the chair, no, I've not received any.
We have two sets of minutes tonight. Can I have a mover that the minutes of the ordinary council meeting held on the 24th of March 2020, as published and circulated, are confirmed as a true and accurate record of the proceedings? Thank you, Councillor Boyd, mover, and seconder, Councillor Blair. All those in favour? Carried unanimously, thank you. On the basis of the above motion, I now sign the minutes as a true and accurate record of the meeting of the 24th of March 2020. I would now like a mover that the minutes of the special council meeting held on the 7th of April 2020 is confirmed as a true and accurate record. Thank you, Councillor O'Donnell, and seconded by Councillor Ritchie. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. On the basis of the above motion, I now sign the minutes as a true and accurate record of the meeting of the 7th of April 2020. There are no announcements by the member presiding without discussion. We move to item 8. I'm going to move 8.2 to the meeting closed to the public, and unless there's any questions, I will just allow 8.1 to go through. However, any councillor can close the meeting for that one as well if you have questions. Are there any disclosure of interest?
Through the chair, I have not received any.
Thank you. We move on to reports to council. 10.1 and 10.2 inclusive. Does anyone want to pull either of those out? Otherwise, I'll ask for a mover to recommend those. Okay, so we have 10.1. Draft local planning policy. Are there any questions, councillors? No, the recommendation is on page 12. Can I have a mover for the officer recommendation on page 12? Councillor O'Connor, seconded by Councillor Boyd. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Item 10.1.2, Draft Activity Centre Strategy, Adoption for Public Advertising. Are there any questions, councillors? Councillor O'Connor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We had a speaker, Mr Forrest, raised an issue with some of the data being 2016. Can the Director give some commentary to the relevance of that data?
Through the Chair, thank you for your question, Councillor O'Connor. The data that's been provided as part of the Activity Centre strategy is the latest available data available to the City's staff and its consultants that assisted with preparing the retail model, and on that basis that's been utilised for preparation of the report. The following census data for retail purposes has not yet been released, nor am I of the understanding it's been actually collected.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Sewell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just in relation to the pedestrian concerns that Mr Forrest raised this evening, are you able to speak to those concerns at all?
Thank you. Through the Chair, I could address the issue with pedestrian crossings in the Kalamata town centre. Mr Forrest has raised this issue several times with the City, and each and every time we've advised Mr Forrest that apart from the crossing that was put in Canning Road opposite the IGA, none of the other crossing points satisfy any warrant from main roads for formalised pedestrian crossings, so we're unable to install them, and such that the planning underway for Haynes Street, for argument's sake, is looking at a mixed pedestrian traffic environment where there are no formalised pedestrian crossings because they simply cannot be installed under the requirements of main roads.
Councillor Ritchie, you have a question.
Just a follow-up question. Brett, am I understanding that we were talking to Main Roads about the possibility of not just this but the area in High Wycombe as well as being dropped to a 40 km/h zone, and where we are up to with that? Thank you.
Director of Asset Services.
Thank you. Through the Chair, the planning for these areas are targeting to reduce the speed limits through the infrastructure and the placemaking. Is one of the new objectives that Main Roads' policy for reducing speed limits allows placemaking, etc., to be a valid reason to reduce speed limits, and that's what our objective is trying to achieve for Haynes Street.
Councillor Stallard, you have a
yes,
question.
another follow-up for the Director. Up opposite Coles, there is a pedestrian crossing marked in there. What level there's a raised area and there's markings for crossing. It's not registered as well, I'm not sure if it's registered, but certainly it's not manned or anything like that. But there is a crossing marked there to go across. And I was wondering, would that be a benefit? Can that be upgraded for the people who are moving through those areas and trying to get to things like the Bibliman track start site and so on?
Director?
Through the chair, that you're referring to a railway road with the non-pedestrian priority points that have been raised plateaus. That would be considered when we start looking at the railway road streetscape as part of the Kalamata Town Centre plan, but that's not at the short-term priority. Haynes and Central are at the present time.
Are there any other questions? Councillor O'Connor?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Given this strategy covers the whole city, and the recommendation talks about going out for advertising for not less than 28 days, I couldn't find anywhere in the report that talks about how long it's actually going to go out for public advertising. So can I have that clarified, please?
Director?
Thank you for your question, Councillor O'Connor. The phrasing within the resolution is not less than 28 days, and that relates to the planning, local planning and development regulations with regards to local planning strategies. And we phrase this in terms of not less than 28 days because it gives us flexibility for longer than 28 days. An example is the city's local housing strategy, which is currently being publicly advertised, which is in the order of 52 days where public advertising has been undertaken. So we would envisage a similar time frame, usually around 2 months, that we would allow for a strategy of this nature to be advertised. And the timeframes in the resolution are tied to the planning regulations in relation to local planning strategies, being 28 days, and we've stated not less than 28 days to provide us that flexibility and not be so prescriptive, to also allow for extensions of advertising should the interest in the initial advertising efforts not expand as far and wide as we had anticipated.
Are there any other questions? We have the officer recommendation on page 27. Can I have a mover? Councillor Giardina, seconded by Councillor Stallard. Is there going to be any debate? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? That is carried unanimously. Councillors, I'm going to take each item individually because we're closing for one of them. So let's go to 10.2.1, and I'll remind you that if you want to ask questions about the confidential part of this, we need to go behind closed doors. But if not, the officer recommendation is on page 33. Are there any questions? Can I have a mover for this officer recommendation? Councillor O'Connor, and a seconder, Councillor Giardina. Is there going to be any debate? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? That is carried unanimously. We'll take item 10.2.2 to the end of this meeting and move on to item 10.2.3, the long-term cycle network. Councillors, do you have any questions? Councillor Boyd.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question. The report refers to, at point 4, the Ordinary Council meeting in June 2018. I'm just wondering if I could get some comment from the Director in respect to that and where this ties in, because Council's decision in June 18 was that in respect to the bicycle plan, I'm just reading it, I've just got it in front of me here, the bicycle, or the zigzag scenic drive and the bicycle plan in relation to that. I just want some confirmation from the Director that this long-term cycle network doesn't override the Council's decision back in June 2018 in respect to that, because the Council is still waiting, or not waiting, but until another report comes back, nothing can happen
I just want to make sure that that is still the case, and that nothing can come on top. This doesn't allow another plan to come in place that we don't consider, if that makes sense.
Director of Asset Services.
Thank you. Through the Chair, thank you for the question, Councillor Boyd, and I can understand concerns that this might surreptitiously embed a decision on zigzag scenic drive. Noted in point 10 of the report, our Bicycle Plan 2017 has been used by the Department in the development of the long-term cycling network. What that was a request from the Department, what is your bicycle plan, which we furnished with the Council decision, including the fact that the engagement program for zigzag scenic drive had to be presented to Council before that became in or out of the bicycle plan.
Any other questions? No. Well, we have a officer recommendation on page 42. Do I have a mover? Councillor Sewell, and a seconder, Councillor Blair. Is there going to be any debate? I will put the motion. All those in favour? That is carried unanimously. The Chief Executive Officer report. There's only 3, and I know we have some questions, so I'll also take these individually. So 10.3.1, the draft monthly financial statements. Are there any questions? The officer recommendations on page 50. Do I have a mover? Councillor Stallard, and a seconder, Councillor Boyd. Is there going to be any debate? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 10.3.2, we've got debtors and creditors report, and we have some questions here with the answers from Councillor Stallard and Councillor Ritchie. Are there any other questions?
Can I have some qualifications on my answers to my questions?
Councillor Stallard.
Thank you. We may need to change just one of them if it's warranted a change on the one on the second page of the response I got, which was EFT 74857, ATI Mirage Training Solutions. It did say on the actual, in the documents, in the attachments, that it was for one person for the training. In actual fact, it was 12 people and 6 for full days and 6 for half day. I just thought that the information that was on there wasn't accurate, because when I checked it out online, it was 550, but obviously we've done remarkably well by getting a huge discount by having a bulk group done, so congratulations. But I just wanted to correct the information, if we need to, in the attachment, which is 10.3.221. That's the first one. Where was the other one I was going to query? Yes. No, I'll leave that one to when we do budgetary considerations. Thank you.
Councillors, are there any other questions? The officer's recommendation is on page 57. Do I have a mover? Councillor Stallard, and a seconder. Councillor Blair. Is there going to be any debate? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? That is carried unanimously. Item 10.3.3, the rates debtors report. Are there any questions? I will ask for a mover for the officer recommendation on page 62. Councillor Boyd, and a seconder. Councillor Cooper. Is there going to be any debate, councillors? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 10.3.4, delegations of authority. Councillors, are there any questions? The officer recommendation is on page 67. Do I have a mover? Councillor Stallard, and a seconder. Councillor Blair. Is there going to be any debate?
Question, Chair.
Question, Councillor O'Connor?
Can I propose an amendment?
Can we hear your amendment?
That we delete point F, the car parking dispensation.
Can you give us some information about why you would like that removed?
Just briefly, I just don't think that that's something, 30% is a large portion of dispensation to not have come to council, and currently to give dispensation, council needs to consider that, and I think 30% is too much. That's my personal view, and I'd like that not to be delegated.
Councillor Sewell, do you have a comment? A question?
I would like to know from the Officer recommendation as to how that 30% figure, how that was determined.
Which director would like to answer that question?
Through the chair, 30% is a number that often comes up through the planning assessment process, or thereabouts, close to 30%. I'll just draw council's attention to an item that we had go last month, direct to OCM, for upgrades to a neighbourhood centre on Edinburgh Road in Forestfield. The only reason that item came to council is because there wasn't a delegation for officers to approve a parking dispensation. There was little community interest. The proponent went through a process with our design review panel where we were comfortable with the design outcome, and the only reason that landowner had to wait longer for their approval was because there wasn't a delegation to the city staff to approve a dispensation for parking, and it was, from memory, in the order of around 30%. That dispensation was recommended for approval. A comprehensive planning assessment was undertaken and detailed within the report. Any decisions under delegation would also go through a thorough planning assessment that's documented within the city's record system, and similarly could be approved under delegation. So 30% is a number that comes up regularly through development assessments, and I note that the recommendation is only for this this delegation to be in place during the state of emergency. And I also note in an item that council passed for public advertising earlier this evening, the activity centre strategy, that there's an action within that strategy that requires a comprehensive car parking strategy. So the city will be embarking on a process looking at how it will exercise parking dispensation in a strategic context through the implementation of that action in the activity centre strategy on a more permanent basis. But the staff have recommended during the crisis this delegation to allow items such as that went to council last month to be expedited, noting that there is always a comprehensive planning assessment undertaken with any dispensation that's recommended to council or development assessment panels, and likewise would occur for any planning decisions made under delegation.
The Chair, Director, can you also mention that even when you are delegated with a planning decision, if there's dissent in the community, we will always bring those to council? Isn't that a general standard of practice as well?
Through the chair, that's correct.
Councillor Boyd, you have a question?
Yeah, just a follow-up question to that response, and then I have another question, if I may. Could the director mentioned in his at the beginning of his response about mentioning Edinburgh Road as an example that bringing it to council delayed the approval and the potential for that to be subsequent if we didn't approve this. What does that delay entail, given that OCM is a 4-week process or 2-week process from PAB 2 coming in here? What does that delay entail or look like as a matter of weeks?
Through the chair, for the purposes of the Edinburgh Road example, that development application was not published as part of the public agenda briefing. It was an item that went as a CEO report direct to OCM. So the delay for that item is in the order of 4 weeks for an item that goes direct to OCM. For items that go through the public agenda briefing process and then OCM, it's in the order of 6 to 8 weeks, and that's to account for internal review processes prior to agendas being released.
Councillor Boyd, you have another question?
Yeah, probably more seeking, I guess, potentially, and some may see it as semantics, and I'm definitely not a semantics person, but maybe just a tidy up of the words in the preamble, and also some clarification. My understanding is that the declaration is a declaration of state of emergency, and a public health state of emergency declaration. They're two separate wordings. So just wondering if there's an issue with just tidying up those wordings. And also my question around those is, we have an or in there. So is it cessation of both, or is it one? Is it whichever comes first, or is it once both have occurred that this is going to come to an end? I'm just wondering if I can get some clarification around the what's being proposed, please.
Who would like to answer that?
Director Development, can you answer the question about whether it's a state or a health emergency? What is the technical term for?
There's two, but it's just the actual wording. One's called a declaration of state of emergency, and the other one is a West Australian declaration of public health state of emergency.
Right, so if that's all the correct wording, would you like those wordings inserted and this removed as an amendment?
I'd like those wordings that just to be tidied up if I can.
Yep.
But my then question is, because it says immediate effect until cessation of declarations of state or health emergency. So I'm just wondering what the or entails. So
It should be an and, shouldn't it?
yeah, that's my
I think
question. So,
So can you just say what
Sure.
they're meant to be again?
So
please?
it's West Australian Declaration of State of Emergency, because they actually end at different points in time at the moment.
Yep, and?
And the other one is West Australian Declaration of Public Health State of Emergency.
Okay.
Public Health State of Emergency.
Thank you, Councillor Boyd. Are there any other questions?
Can I ask a question through the chair? In the move of this motion, I'm just wondering where Councillor O'Connor's sitting with his recommended or requested amendment to the point that would he or would the council take on board a smaller number, or the extra comment to say unless there's dissent on that final point, and if there's dissent, automatically comes to council.
So
is that something that's worth
if
looking
Councillor
at?
O'Connor is willing to make those changes and the mover is happy, we can do that. Otherwise, I'm going to take the motion as it is, because I think it's significantly different. And if that doesn't pass, then we'll have a motion without point F. But I'll ask Councillor O'Connor, are you happy to add those words unless there's dissent?
No, Madam Chair, because it's really hard to measure that, so I'm happy to treat it as an alternate motion.
Okay, so
can I ask the other part was, did you have a number that you would have preferred, or are you saying that
instead of the
be any
30%?
Yeah.
Again, it's really hard to quantify it, because 30% can be 3 out of 9 or 10, or 30 out of 100. So
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to take the motion exactly as it is, councillors, and if that fails, then I'm going to have a new motion without point F. So we've got a mover and a seconder for the motion. Obviously, there's going to be some debate, so can I ask the mover to speak to the motion?
All right, thank you. While I acknowledge that parking is a big issue within the city, especially up here in the hills when their events are on, parking is an issue, so I understand that point. Although at this stage I also understand that if we are trying to keep things moving and trying to give the opportunity for things to progress through our community, certainly any business applications and that, the long delays that often occur in dealing with any questioning, challenging of parking, going through the process of coming through council, as indicated, there's a huge increase in the time frame, and therefore that can be a negative aspect to any application or anyone wanting to apply. I suppose this is a questionable, it's an arbitrary number, and I understand, as was indicated, if there is any dissent or any aspect of anyone being concerned about it or anything that needs greater looking into it, then it will come to us as a council. Whereas at the moment, like a lot of the other stuff we've done in reducing the tenders and also the tender amounts and so on, the write-off of rates and debts, this is just a component of a agreement that we've come to as a council to assist people in the community to get past and help us get past this virus and this pandemic that's affecting all of us. I suppose it's trying to fast track and trying to help us to move into a situation where we're helping the businesses who are going to be struggling or who really want to get things going. Unfortunately, I can see both sides, and I agree with both sides, so it's a difficult one. But I just think at this stage we've put it in there to try and help people to move forward, especially businesses.
The seconder, would you like to give your comments, Councillor Blair?
Yes, I would agree with Jeffrey, and just find that 30%'s been explained quite well by the director, and happy with the 30% to stay in as is.
Can I ask a question of the director? I know you don't have a crystal ball, but do you envisage there will be many that will require this 30% efficiency in the parking bays?
Through the chair, I'd envisage less than a handful.
Thank you. A speaker against the motion, Councillor O'Connor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The director talked about the absence of an activity centre car parking strategy, which we don't currently have, which is going to be developed. So we don't have that currently. I understand there's pressures from the state government for us to streamline and get things moving and try and stimulate local businesses and assist people to get on with things. But we have to balance that and temper that desire to get on with it with due process. And there's sometimes council is aware of things that the staff aren't aware of. And, you know, to have 12 sets of eyes look over a car parking dispensation of this magnitude, I don't think this is something that we should be delegating to the staff. I've supported all the other delegations. I just think this one, which didn't come from the state government, it came from our organisation internally, and I simply just don't agree with it. We've got a pretty good reputation in the planning sector for having good timelines and good turnaround times. I just simply don't believe this is a delegation that we should be making tonight. So I ask you to support my alternate motion. Thank you.
Is there another speaker for the motion? Councillor Sewell.
Thank you. This isn't a state government initiative. It's encouraged by the state government, but this is a local government initiative, and it's our responsibility to do everything that we possibly can to make things easier for businesses within the city. And I do think that when there is dissent, that our community members make that very clear. And I haven't been here very long, but every OCM I've attended, the public make it very clear when they're unhappy with something that's been put before them, even on social media. So there are many opportunities for community members to communicate their dissent. I think that removing F takes away the intent, and it extends a period of time that's unnecessary. And I think that it would alleviate a lot of anxiety that many business people are currently feeling within our community. So I'm in full support of the motion for the life of the state of emergency that we are in, and I'm looking forward to having a more permanent plan for the future.
Excuse me, Madam Chair, can I just have a point of clarification?
Yes.
point 10 of the report outlines that this request actually did come from the Minister for Planning, as outlined in her letter on the 25th of March, which is an attachment. So it wasn't something that we came up with. It actually was directed by the Planning Minister. So that was just a correction I thought I heard.
Thank you, CEO. Did you have a question, Councillor Sewell?
Just in addition to that, though, I think it needs to be noted that this isn't just about the state government, it's actually about doing the right thing as councillors for businesses as well.
Thank you. Is there a speaker against the motion? Question, Councillor Boy?
Yeah, I've got a question for the Director, if I may. Do these types of planning matters have a statutory requirement in respect to the timeframes that the city has to deal with them?
Through the Chair, yes, there are statutory timeframes associated with applications.
Follow-up question, Councillor Boy?
What's that statutory timeframe, please?
Through the Chair, generally it's 60 or 90 days depending on the nature of the application.
Thank you. There's no speaker
Question?
against. Question, Councillor O'Connor?
Thank you. Just a point of clarification. The CEO made a statement about these coming from the state government or advice. Can the Director clarify that that's correct, please?
I think the Governance Manager can. Can you, Governor, can speak to it? I think you wrote the report and did the research.
Councillors, the letter is on the screen. So if there's no speaker against the motion, that's clarified that. I will go back to the mover. Councillor Stallard.
Thank you. I don't want to delay this too much, and I've always had a feeling in both sides of the camp here, but at this stage I'm pushing this one. So the Director said there'll be very few applications, so on those grounds I think it's not an issue for the general community as much as we may think. Certainly in the third paragraph it showed that the state government did indicate that they would that we would try to fast track or try to preempt stuff and get it moving, and that's written in that document that was shown on the screen. And the last one I think needs to come through is that I don't believe for 1 minute that our Director, through the CEO, wouldn't bring to our attention anything that had the capacity to cause any problems or any difficulties later on, especially post the emergency. So and at that stage it lapses anyhow, that policy. But I don't think they would bring anything or sign off on anything that could cause problems for the short term and even for the long term. So I have confidence in our staff that this would go through okay and it wouldn't be an issue.
Thank you, Councillor Stallard. So the motion is on page 67 and I'm putting the motion as is, which is points A including F. So all those in favour? Councillor Sewell, Councillor Stallard, Councillor Giardina, Councillor Boyd, Councillor Cannon, Councillor O'Donnell, Councillor... Sorry, having a village. Sorry, Councillor Village. Councillor Blair, Councillor Cooper, Councillor Ritchie, Councillor Thomas, and against Councillor O'Connor. The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. Item 11, motions of which previous notice has been given. There are none. Questions by members without notice. Councillors, do you have any questions? Councillor O'Connor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councillors, today I emailed all councillors an issue that is occurring down in High Wycombe on Milner Road, and I understand the staff have made contact with the resident. Can I have some feedback about what took place, please?
Director of Asset Services.
Thank you. Through the Chair, we were advised Friday by that resident that their tiles had gone pop and they heard a very large bang. Consequently, my manager of asset planning attended the property and looked at them, advised immediately that they get in contact with their insurance company, which the residents have since done.
Are there any other questions? Councillor Ritchie?
I understand from the letter from the resident that the insurance company won't cover it because it's not considered to be an earthquake. Isn't that the gist of the letter we got today? The letter that came through today from the resident? So I'm really asking, do we have liability is what I'm really asking.
Director of Asset Services?
Until such time that the insurance company makes a determination, I can't answer that question. I think the claim from the residents, they wanted temporary accommodation, which their insurance company wouldn't cover.
Are there any other questions? Thank you. There are no questions by members of which due notice has been given, and there is no urgent business approved by the presiding member. So we need to deal with 8.2, and I'd like a move that we go behind closed doors. Councillor Boyd, seconded by Councillor Blair. All those in favour? Thank you very much. Officers, maybe you could see if there's any of the general public still there.